I usually don't like the headphones.
Oh, really?
Like if I'm doing a radio show or
Yeah.
something like that. I know it's necessary, but everything sounds weird to me.
I've heard like other podcasters say that they like it so people don't talk over each other because you can hear
Right.
each other in the microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool though. Do you do a lot of radio shows?
No, I wouldn't say a lot. I do more podcasts than radio shows, but it's
Oh, really?
usually Zoom or over the phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not a
Yeah.
lot of live
Hmm.
in the same room podcasts.
Oh, wow. So this will
But
be.
but it's same as when I do radio shows, it's more similar to this.
Mhm. Yeah. This will be an experience then.
Yeah.
The podcast live, which is what I've been trying to do them. Mostly live. Not that Zoom's bad. I actually did over the phone interview with an author, Robert Cass, and it was really good. And he's a very, very interesting guy. But I wish I would have done it in person. Yeah, it just.
Yeah, there's something. I mean, it's fine, but you can always kind of tell, and
Yeah.
it just seems like it's better in person. Whoa.
Oh, yeah.
What happened? Did I do that?
Oh, we're still good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's still good?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Before we begin, just hi everybody. My name is Chris. This is Chee-Tash, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Bill Morrison. Bill, if you can please just introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Hi, Chris. I'm an artist, a cartoonist, illustrator, writer, editor. I sort of wear a lot of hats. Most people know me for The Simpsons, but also I was editor-in-chief of Mad Magazine, and I got to work on a Beatles project recently, the Yellow Submarine graphic novel. So I'm sort of checking all my childhood passions off my bucket list.
That's cool. I did see the Beatles thing. Is that your favorite band?
I would say it's my favorite band, yes.
Yeah.
I would say my favorite rock performer is David Bowie.
Okay.
And I have some other favorite kind of solo artists. But as far as like, a group of musicians working together, I can't think of anybody better than the Beatles.
Because I remember somebody telling me this that I used to work with a long time ago. He was saying apparently, is this true? There's a rivalry between people who say Rolling Stones, people who say the Beatles.
Yeah, it's probably not, a tense or an intense rivalry, but yeah, I mean, it's like, people who drive Corvettes versus Camaros, that kind of thing. Some people are just, some people like Coke. Some people like Pepsi.
Yeah, okay.
But they don't get into fisticuffs over it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think so I'm not the biggest, I like rock and roll, but I'm more of like a hip hop kind of guy.
Yeah.
And maybe like an equivalent would be, there's people who say Jay-Z or Nas as like the bet, or like Notorious B.I.G. or Tupac,
right?
Something like that. Maybe
isn't that kind of like a West Coast, East Coast kind of thing?
Yeah. So that's the thing is, there was that rivalry, and the two different sounds, which, at the time, I think the stereotype was New York rappers were more lyrical. West Coast had the G-funk and the beats were different, like very different sounding.
Well, I think the Beatles and the Stones, they had a friendly rivalry, but they were also friends.
Oh, really?
And the Beatles actually wrote some songs for the Rolling Stones early on, because the Stones started really as more of an R&B group.
Oh, okay.
They were more into the blues, and they weren't really, for the most part, they didn't have the same rock and roll influences that the Beatles had. So they were very, very different. It's just that when their sounds kind of kind of
Coalesce.
Coalesce. That's the word I was looking for. When their sounds kind of coalesced in the early '60s, and you had the British invasion, they couldn't help but compete, even though their sounds were still pretty different. They were competing for the top spot on the charts, and most people just sort of lump rock and roll of all stripes in together, even though there are very, very different forms of rock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know that from the movie School of Rock with Jack Black.
Oh, yeah.
And he has
That's a great movie. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny. He's got the chalkboard, and I remember there's one scene in the movie where there's like a B-roll, and there's music playing, and it's just kind of progressing along the storyline. I think they call it a B-roll, and he's lecturing to the students, and he's got different diagrams of like all these different types of rock and roll.
Yeah.
One thing that I kind of found out was how influential British like groups like were here. Like they were huge here.
Oh yeah.
To the point where I almost think like I almost didn't realize, are there any American bands? But there are,
Oh sure.
But
and in before the Beatles came along, and then the British invasion, the Beatles kind of opened the door for all these British bands to get radio airplay in the States. But prior to that, I mean, there were so many huge bands, but I mean, the Beach Boys was probably the biggest. But you had a lot of R&B groups, Motown.
Oh right, yeah.
Even like rockabilly, country-ish bands, rockabilly. Elvis, obviously not a band so much as a solo performer, but I mean, he had a backing band. But
Michael Jackson, maybe that was later. But
that was later, and that grew out of Motown because the Jackson 5, Michael and his brothers were a Motown act. They weren't actually from Detroit; they came from Indiana.
Right.
But it was close enough that they could come up to Detroit and, record and, have meetings and et cetera. But,
yeah.
Man, I didn't know this was going to be a discussion about music. I would have come better prepared.
I love it. It's funny. I started out one interview with an author, Eric Bean. And it's funny, we started off the interview kind of similar. We were talking about music, and he wrote a book about news. And the book was titled Biases All Around You, and how to like vet like news sources and stuff. And I had told him how in today's world with digital music, it's almost like artists are now making music for playlists versus making albums, because they know that in order to make money, they make money off of the streams. What are people mostly streaming are these predetermined playlists on like Spotify, Apple, what have you. So they make singles, which are popular, to get on the playlist because they know they're going to listen to that versus listening to their actual album that releases. So it's crazy how, like, just how music has changed in a way. I mean, I still remember buying CDs, and I mean, I'm sure you probably bought vinyls, I'm assuming, like back in the day.
Originally vinyl, and then 8-tracks. When I was a teenager, I had 8-tracks because I had an 8-track player in my car, my parents' car. And then cassette tapes, and then eventually CDs in the 80s. Those came in.
Yeah.
And I remember vowing, because I had by the 80s, I had this pretty big record collection. And then everybody was talking about this new format, CDs, and they would never deteriorate, and you can't scratch them. There were all these pluses that people were expounding on. And I remember I had a friend who was, he was almost evangelizing, was trying to get me to come over to CDs. And I said, at the time, like my favorite performer was Todd Rundgren, and who you probably never heard of. But if I played one of his songs, one of the big hits, you would go, "Oh yeah, I've heard that." But anyway, I love Todd Rundgren, and I told him, I said, "Look, CDs could be a fad. I'm not going to, just start replacing my record collection with CDs. But I'll make you a deal. The minute Todd Rundgren music is available on CD, I will switch over." And so the day they came out with the first Todd Rundgren album on CD, he called me up and he said, "Guess what just came out?" And I was like, "Oh, damn it." So at that point I started buying CDs. I never, I don't know. I remember all the controversy in the 90s over Napster.
Oh, yeah.
And that really changed everything because suddenly you could get music for free.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we have things like Spotify, and some people don't even buy physical versions of music, and some people don't even download it anymore. They just go to Spotify or some other format like that, and you can hear just about anything you want to hear at any time. I kind of do that myself because now, it used to be you'd buy a car and it would have some form of player in it.
Yeah.
It would have a tape player or it would have a CD player. And now it has nothing. And I'm like, I used to have like a case with all my favorite CDs, and I would, take that on trips or have it in the car to listen to on my way to work. And now I just, I put on XM radio and, put on the 60s channel or the Beatles channel or Underground Garage or, jazz or whatever.
Wow. Yeah. I was just thinking about that. Cars, my car still has a CD player, but it's a little older. But I know, newer cars are just Bluetooth. I don't even think they have auxiliary cord.
Yeah.
No cassette player, CD player. Times are changing.
But I still buy CDs, even though I've bought CDs recently that I've never played because I don't currently. My wife and I moved from California a couple of years ago, so I've been setting up my studio, which is normally where I listen to music, and I still haven't set up a sound system in there. So I've got CDs that I bought more recently that I think, okay, well, once I get my sound system, I'll play this. But it's just kind of sitting there waiting.
Speaking of that, I know you said you moved here from California. Are you originally from California?
No, I'm originally from Detroit.
Oh, okay.
Well, suburban Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, growing up, how big was your family, brothers and sisters?
There were 6 of us, 6 siblings. My mother was married to a man with whom she had 3 children, and then he died. And then she married my father and then had 3 more. So 3 of my siblings are like half siblings, but I don't think of them that way. Mm-hmm. They're just my brother and my sisters. So I'm kind of the middle. It's weird because I'm my dad's oldest child, but I'm my mom's middle child.
Oh, okay. Wow. And in the family, was there other creative siblings, or were you the
somewhat? Yeah, my sister, my younger sister Donna, when she was in school, she was a pretty good artist and got into ceramics. So she made some. For a while, she was making some really cool pots and ceramic things. She never went into that professionally. My oldest sister Sue, who is 11 years older, she's the one that got me started drawing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't remember this, but she said when I was 3 years old, she sat me down at the kitchen table and, with pencil and paper or crayons or whatever. And she drew a little stick man. And she said, I'm going to go do something and I'll be back in a few minutes. But while I'm gone, I want you to imitate what I did. So I want you to draw a stick man, just like I did. And she went away, and I looked at what she had drawn, and I guess I must have thought, well, that's not what a person looks like. And so I started drawing a person, and I gave the body like a width. So it wasn't just a stick, just a line for the body. It was a double line, you know? And I think I had like the arms coming out of the middle of the body instead of, like, I didn't understand shoulders yet. But other than that, I guess it was, by all accounts, a pretty good drawing because I added all these details like hair and, you know, fingers and clothing, you know, enough to the point where my sister came back and she kind of flipped out and she looked at my drawing and she just declared, "Oh my God, Billy, you're going to be an artist." And I guess that stuck with me. And it wasn't just that, but she was the kind of person where I was kind of like, my mom had her hands full with a lot of kids. So my sister being the oldest, and she's a teenager at this point, she sort of took me under her wing. And it was fun for her to teach me how to draw things. And whatever I was into, like I would go through these phases growing up. You know, I had my Charlie Brown and Snoopy phase, and I had my Batman phase, which I still have to this day. But, you know, I had monsters, you know, where I had monster models, and I loved the Wolfman and Frankenstein. So whatever I was into, she would, you know, say, "Hey, let's sit down and draw, and I'll show you how to draw the Wolfman." And she would get like a big piece of paper and crayons, and she would kind of look at my monster model that I had up on the shelf, and she would do a drawing of it. And then she would tack that up on my bedroom wall. And I just remember it became like a regular playtime thing for us. But it got me, it sort of put it in my head that as I got older and started thinking about what am I going to be when I grow up, you know, and a lot of kids are thinking about fireman, policeman, doctor, lawyer. I'm thinking artist, but I didn't really know what that entailed. I didn't know if I was going to be like a painter or somebody who draws comic books or somebody who just draws greeting cards. I didn't know, you know. But as I got into comics more and more, then that became the focus, and that's when I started sort of setting my course for what I would do later in life. It took me a while to get there, but but that was always in my head. I think probably from the point where I discovered Batman on television and started actually reading comic books, and you know, so I guess I was like 7 or 8, and then I really started thinking, okay, I want to be a comic book artist. Because that seems like a thing that people do. Like somebody does these, somebody makes these things, and I want to do that someday.
I like do Sunday morning comics. Does that fit into any of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I discovered those before I really got into comic books because that's where I mentioned Charlie Brown and Snoopy. Like I remember reading Peanuts in the Sunday comics every week, and I think even the daily ones I would clip them out and save them.
Oh yeah.
I had like a scrapbook. I had like a Snoopy scrapbook. And I got the little paperback books that reprinted the comics from earlier years. And yeah, for a couple of years I had, I think I was in like second grade, like second and third grade. My bedroom was just like Snoopy everything. You know, I had posters and bedspread. My bedspread was all Peanuts, and my curtains, you know, the drapes, the rug. I'm trying to think of wastebasket. I'm trying to think of all the stuff I had.
Was there any, how about Garfield?
Garfield came later.
Oh,
and by
okay.
then, you know, I was probably a teenager, or even, I'm not sure exactly when Garfield came out. I might have been in my early 20s by then.
Because that was kind of my thing, was Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, The Far Side. Those, in with what you were saying with the books that you could buy, that's what I would get more so than see them in the newspaper. Like I would go to even the library or bookstore and just get like the Calvin and Hobbes collection book and just spend a whole day reading those. Those were great. Yeah, but as far as comic books, I didn't really get into comic books, although I will say there's a graphic novel that I really like, The Watchmen, which I have.
It's great. It's a great graphic novel, yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, it's essentially a book. I mean, the story, the writing, I mean, really good.
Yeah, it originally came out as 12 individual issues.
Oh, okay.
So originally it was a miniseries, but you know, a lot of times nowadays they'll take a story arc in comics. They'll take like 4 issues of Batman or 6 issues that are all kind of linked together, like they have a story arc, and they'll put those in a book collection. They'll call it a graphic novel. And it sort of is, but it's really not, because it was intended originally as individual issues that were continued one to the next and are even continued beyond that story arc. You know, there's still elements of that story that might continue to play out. But Watchmen was really conceived as an original graphic novel. It's just that it had to be marketed as a miniseries.
Okay.
So in order to kind of pay for it, they had to have it come out in 12 individual issues before they could collect it into the intended form, which was a novel.
Okay. I see. Well, that's very cool. Growing up, were you DC guy, Marvel?
I was a DC kid because mainly because the store that my dad first took me to buy comics was in Lincoln Park, Michigan. And it was, you know, just kind of like a mom and pop corner bookstore. So it wasn't like a chain store, and it wasn't a comic shop because we didn't really have dedicated comic shops back then. There were a few in Detroit that were considered comic shops, but they sold old comics. So they were kind of like an antique comic book specialty store. They didn't really carry the new stuff. That didn't come until like, you know, the 70s with what they call the direct market, where you started having dedicated comic book stores that had the new comics every week, and you know, all that entails. But back then, they were just, you know, spinner racks in a bookstore or in a drugstore or a 7-Eleven. And you just had to, you know, if you were following a regular comic book series, it wasn't always guaranteed that you were going to be able to find the next issue. You know, like you might get there and it's sold out, and then if you didn't have a bike and could ride around to a lot of different places, you might not, you know, get it.
Yeah.
But the store that my dad took me to didn't have Marvel comics. Weirdly, I mean, they had everything else. I remember, you know, Archie, you know, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse. They had Charlton comics, which were kind of, you know, like the lower end superhero comic books. They had Dell, which covered like they would do adaptations of all the popular TV shows and popular movies, as well as funny animals, that kind of thing. And they had a ton of DC comics, but no Marvels. And the only Marvel comic I ever saw growing up was a copy of Fantastic Four number 42. And the reason I remember that is because my best friend had it, and he didn't have any other comics. He just had, for some weird reason, he had that one comic book, and it was always laying on this table in his basement. So if I was over at his house playing, if there was like a lull in whatever we were doing, or, he had to go upstairs and do something for his mom, I would pick up that comic book. And I remember every time, I would do it out of boredom, and I knew this comic book wasn't really for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand it. I knew that these characters were superheroes somehow, but they didn't wear masks and they didn't have capes, and they all wore the exact same costume except for the big rock guy who just wore blue underwear. And, so I just remember thinking, Marvel Comics, they're just, they're so boring. They're not like DC Comics, with these exciting superheroes with secret identities. That was the other thing. Like, the characters didn't have secret identities. Everybody knew who they were. So they were just weird to me. And I remember seeing them on television because they had animated cartoons for Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. And I watched Spider-Man. I thought he was pretty cool. But I guess I knew there were comic books, but I'd never seen one. And there were these very limited animation cartoons that were on weekdays in the afternoon that had Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, Captain America, and Submariner. Mm-hmm. So like every day of the week there was a different superhero. And those were kind of cool. But again, I didn't know where I could get comic book versions of these characters. To me, they were just kind of cartoons. So it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13, and my sister's friend came over one day with this stack of comic books, about maybe 3 or 4 inches high. And she said, my brother was getting rid of these, and I know you like comic books, so I thought you might want them. And I was very excited at first. I was like, oh, great, wow. And I started looking through them, and they're all Marvels. And I was like, Iron Man, Thor. Well, Thor has a cape at least, but still doesn't wear a mask. And so they just kind of sat in my room, and I didn't really look at them. And then there was this one day, it was raining, and I couldn't go out and play. And so I'm just having like a rainy, boring afternoon sitting in my room, and I decided to pick up one of the comics and read it, and it was eye-opening. It was just kind of stunning how like I got to the end of that, and it was, of course, all the Marvel comics were continued next issue. Like the DCs were done in one.
Oh.
Like you could read a Batman story and you didn't have to worry about whether you had the issue before or whether you could find the issue after. Because, you had a complete story just in one issue. But the Marvels, they were like a soap opera.
Wow.
And so I remember like getting to the end of that issue and going, oh my God, do I have the next one?
So they give you like a cliffhanger?
Yeah.
Like at the end?
Yeah. There'd be like a cliffhanger at the end. And that, brilliantly, that would make kids go, oh, I got to get the next issue. Whereas with DCs, you're like, yeah, if I get the next issue, great. If not, no big deal. Oh. So I guess, I think I was at the right age at that point, so like 12, 13, where suddenly they, like the way Marvel comics were written really appealed to me. And, at that point I didn't care that much about, that they weren't like the DC characters. And in fact, I kind of got into the fact that they had problems and they fought each other. Like the heroes would fight each other. That never happened in a DC comic. It would sometimes happen on the cover because they would have these great fake out covers where you're like, Batman and Superman are enemies. What? Yeah. And then you open it up and there's like an explanation for why what you saw on the cover, it wasn't really happening that way. It was like a ruse to fool the Joker or something like that. But in the Marvel comics, they really did fight each other. There would be these misunderstandings.
Okay.
And the heroes would, like fight at first and then realize, oh, we're on the same team, or we have a common enemy. So then they would team up.
Oh, okay. I never knew that about those comics. Wow.
Yep. So yeah, so to answer, that was a long way of answering Your question was, I a Marvel kid or a DC kid?
No, I love it. I love the detail in the answer. You know, when you made that decision that this is kind of what you wanted to do, what happened after you had decided that? Do you remember, like, were you now starting to think, like, okay, what do I do as far as college, after high school? Like, 'cause did you went to school for like creative studies?
Yeah, I
Something
went
like
to
that?
at the time it was called the Center for Creative Studies. Now it's the College for Creative Studies
Oh, okay. Okay.
in Detroit. And, well, all through junior high and high school, I started, thinking, okay, I definitely want to be a Marvel Comics artist. So I wasn't drawing Batman as much anymore. I was drawing Spider-Man and Captain America and the Hulk. And that was where, I was kind of headed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got into college, I I remember like the first couple of years, every assignment I got, I would try to make it a comic assignment. Like even if it really wasn't, I would try to shoehorn comics into it somehow.
Yeah.
And uh, and I thought, I'm gonna really pursue this. And the more I learned about the comic book industry, the more I realized that there were no publishers anywhere at the time but New York City. And I also learned that in order to be a comic book artist for one of the big publishers, you had to get your start by actually living in that city, and you had to be close by. If you establish yourself, they would let you at some point, you could live anywhere and you could just mail things in. But in order to really get started and get your feet wet, they wanted somebody who was there kind of at their beck and call.
Mm-hmm.
And that terrified me because I don't know. I guess, back in the 70s, I had this idea about New York City, which wasn't entirely untrue, that it was a very dangerous place and, a lot of crime. I mean, there were movies like The Out-of-Towners that sort of showed this. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's
No.
like this couple comes to New York for this business meeting, and the guy's going to get this big promotion, and it's a very important thing, and everything goes wrong, and they get mugged, and they lose their hotel reservation, and they have to spend the night in Central Park, and it just, there were a lot of movies like that, a lot of Martin Scorsese movies, crime dramas on TV that were set in New York. Just a lot of depictions of New York as a bad place to live. And that was kind of stuck in my head, and I'd never been there, but I'd kind of prejudged it. And at some point during my 4 years at CCS, I just decided, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if going to New York is really for me. That just sounds scary and hard. And I had an airbrush illustration class, and the teacher's name was Gary Ciccarelli. And he kind of opened my eyes to this West Coast airbrush style that was happening out in California. And it was like beautiful stylized images that were on album covers and movie posters and greeting cards.
Okay.
Lots of, like pinup girls and palm trees and beautiful sunsets and, just a real glamorized vision of the world, through these airbrush artists. And I fell in love with that look. And Gary was great at teaching us how to do that style. And I just remember suddenly going, okay, I think this is for me. I'm going to abandon my dreams of being a comic book artist. And, when I graduate from school, I'll take my portfolio out to Los Angeles and I'll try to get some work doing this.
Nice.
Which is eventually what I did. I was out of school for a year, I think. Yeah. I had a job doing technical illustration in Livonia, Michigan. And I was actually out for 2 years. So I worked for a year, worked on my portfolio at night and on the weekends. And then I got married to my high school sweetheart. And then we moved to Plymouth, which is pretty close to where we're doing this podcast. Yeah. And I continued to work on my portfolio. Mm-hmm. And it was about, it was close to a year, almost a year after we were married. I decided to take a vacation, take a week, and just go out to California. I felt like my portfolio was ready. I made some appointments at various studios and art ad agencies out there. And I had a friend who lived out there whose sofa I could sleep on, and another friend who worked at a rental car. I worked at Avis and got me a cheap car. And I just, like kind of tooled around Los Angeles for a week, went to all these meetings. And one of the places where I interviewed was kind of a boutique ad agency called BD Fox and Friends, B period D period, which stood for Brian David Fox. And he was the owner, and he was a designer, had designed a lot of movie posters for another company, and then went, kind of struck out on his own and started his own company in the late 70s. So by now it's like 1983. And, I showed my portfolio. Almost everybody I showed it to at all these various places, I would get to the end of the interview and it would be generally positive, and they would say, well, give us your leave behind, and if something comes in, we'll give you a call. And I'm like, what do you mean leave behind? And they're like, well, like do you have a card, or do you have a promotional postcard that's got all your information on it? And I didn't have that. And also I was like, well, I live in Detroit. I'm really looking for a studio job. I'm looking for like a full-time job. And everybody said, oh, we don't really do that here. That's not how it works in Los Angeles. In Detroit, that was the norm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you would get a job at a studio or an agency, and you were just in-house, and that was your full-time job.
Sure.
Everybody in Los Angeles was freelance, like all the illustrators.
Wow.
And so I was just thinking, how am I going to establish myself? Like I don't want to go out there and like park cars or wait on tables while I'm hoping to get my break as an illustrator. I want to have something secure. So anyway, I interviewed at BD Fox, and I remember Brian saying, the one thing I don't see in your portfolio, looks like you can really handle an airbrush, and you're a decent illustrator, but I don't see any roughs. And what we could use quite often is people who can do like thumbnail sketches for poster designs, like movie poster designs. So what I'd like you to do is, go back home, just do some like fantasy posters, do something for Star Wars, do something for, like whatever movies, you're interested in, but do like your own version of the poster, but just make it a rough sketch. Just do rough thumbnail sketches.
So just pencil?
Yeah, just pencil sketches, and then send those to us, and then we'll talk after that. I said, oh, okay. So it was disappointing, but I went home with a little bit of hope. And I did what he asked, and I sent my drawings to him. And I was at work one day, and the phone rang. We had like a phone in the kitchen. So like one of the managers calls me into the kitchen. He says, hey, there's a phone call for you.
Oh, nice.
Somebody from California. And I said, oh, okay. So I get on the phone, and it's Brian. And he said, so I got your sketches. They look really good. And he said, a lot of work just came into the agency, and I think we could use you. So can you be here tomorrow? And I was like, this is like 3 p.m, on a Tuesday or whatever. And I'm like, I don't even like, can I get a flight? I have no idea. And so I thought, well, I'm not sure if I can be there tomorrow, but I'm pretty sure I can be there the day after. And he said, okay, that's good enough. So I
Oh,
booked a flight, and then, 2 days later I was in California,
wow.
and he said, we're going to try you out for a month. And if, everything's working for you and everything's working for us, then you'll have a full-time job working in-house. And the reason was, I could do rough sketches. I could do comps, which were kind of usually black and white, rough painted versions of a final poster. So, they would be done like, 11 by 17. They're done mainly just to show the producer of the film, here's an idea, kind of fleshed out, So this is kind of what the poster would look like. It would have all the type on it and everything. The thumbnail sketches were usually just for the designers, like the in-house art directors. So I could do the thumbnail sketches. I could do comps. I could do a finished poster if, push came to shove. I could do retouching. I could do photo retouching. So I checked a lot of boxes that they would normally have to bring in a freelancer for. And they figured, this guy is versatile enough that we could probably keep him busy all the time. So pay him a salary. And it would work for us because it would save us money. It would be cheaper than hiring freelancers for all these various things. And it would work for him because he's looking for a studio job. He doesn't want to be a freelancer. So it was like kind of the perfect marriage. And I remember I was there 2 weeks, and Brian took me out to lunch one day, and he said, well, I think it's working really well for us. How do you feel? And I said, it's working great for me. And he said, okay, why don't you call your wife and tell her you've got a job and, start the process of moving yourself out here. And so that's how I ended up in California.
Oh, nice. Dang, that's an awesome story. Wow. And I was thinking about movie posters and how important they are. Because I think about movies that I really love and how iconic some of their movie posters were, that just really stand out, make me want to see that movie. And even after seeing it, watching it again and again and again, I'm trying to think of some just through history. Well, I know that the ones that you worked on were legendary, that were from my childhood.
Like which ones?
Was it Little Mermaid?
Little Mermaid. I did the very first Little Mermaid.
Yeah, I
poster.
remember watching that a lot as a kid.
Well, the cool thing about movie posters, especially if they're iconic in their imagery, they have an initial function to attract people to the movie. To bring people into theaters. They're printed in, or they used to be. I don't know if they are anymore, but printed in newspapers as an ad, or now you see them online on, movie websites.
Yeah.
But also outside the theaters and the theater lobbies. So they have that function. But then they have a secondary function as a statement. So if you're a fan of a certain movie or a certain movie actor, they end up on your wall.
Yeah.
They're framed on the living room wall of your apartment or in your bedroom. And they become a statement about you.
Yeah.
It's a way of identifying to your friends what you are, what you're into, what you like.
100%.
So yeah, if a movie has a very iconic poster image, I've been told by so many people that, oh my God, they find out I did a certain poster. Oh my God, I had that poster on my wall growing up. I looked at it every day. I can't believe, it was you, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Speaking of movies, Do you have a favorite movie?
It's a Wonderful Life is my favorite.
That's a good one. Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's not just because, I mean, now it's considered a Christmas movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really love it just because of the message of it, which is everything you do in life, like every decision you make, affects the future. And if you weren't there to do a certain thing, the whole future would be different. And so that's what George Bailey, the Jimmy Stewart character, learns in the film.
Mm-hmm.
He learns that his whole world was vastly different without him in it. Like, had he never been born. And it's a little corny the way they depict it, because they make it so negative. Like, it's hard to believe that like one person missing from the equation would make the town of Bedford Falls, such a hellhole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does point out, all the little things that he did in his life that he thought were inconsequential, or even that got in the way of his dream, because he wanted to be an architect, build bridges, and he got stuck in this little town. But all the good things he did for people paid off and changed the future. So that gives me the the notion that I try to keep in my mind whenever I make any kind of decision, that the future is changed with every decision you make, either for good or for bad. If I'm on the freeway and somebody cuts me off and I give them the finger, and I get filled with road rage and I try to cut them off or whatever, even if that doesn't end in a collision or somebody getting beat up or shot, the person that I gave the finger to, that might affect the rest of their day. They might go home and beat their wife, or do something negative as a chain reaction of what I did. And then who knows to what extent that changes their future. So I always try to keep that in mind, like always try to be positive and do good things, because you don't want to be responsible for just doing something negative, even if it's like a little small, inconsequential thing that might lead to, a chain reaction that creates a bigger negative.
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One, I like that you didn't even hesitate. You just know that that's your favorite movie.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. Because sometimes, like for me, I have to think about it a little bit. But I would say for me, it's The Matrix. Or because I also put Goodfellas up there. I really like both of those films.
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
But it's one of those questions I've thought about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I mean, I have a lot of favorite movies. The original Star Wars is one of my favorites.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton. There are some movies that are a favorite, because like if you're flipping through channels, and even if you have the DVD or the Blu-ray of the movie, like if that movie's on, doesn't matter where it is in the movie, you will stop and watch the rest of it. That's how you know it's a favorite movie. So I have like movies like That Thing You Do is one of them.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
A League of Their Own is another one.
I've heard. Yeah.
For some reason, like I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I love baseball movies. So like I love Field of Dreams. I love The Natural. I love 42. A League of 42. Their Own. Yeah. So there's a lot of. They're usually vintage. They're usually like kind of set in the 40s or 50s, but and that's a big plus for me. But it's funny.
The second thing I was going to say was there was a accounting teacher that I had in high school, and every year, at the end of the year, when I had him, because I had him quite a bit for accounting. He would give like the speech to the seniors graduating, and he drew a timeline like on the whiteboard, and he numbered it like as so like your age on the bottom, like depicting your age, and it was like a line or yeah, like a graph basically. And it was super simple. He just said, "All right, everything previously to right here, you can't do anything about anymore. It just is what it is. But look at all this over here that you can have an effect on now." So it's like, why focus on this little part over here when now you have this huge part on this side that you have all the possibilities over here? And super simple, but very powerful, like concept that.
Yeah, and it's something most people don't really think about, or if they do, they don't really dwell on it. But yeah, it's just one of those things that I always try to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And I don't, I'm human. I don't always succeed in that. I sometimes do crappy things that I hope aren't gonna cause a chain reaction that results in a hellhole future. But
yeah. Well, at BD, you said it was BD Fox?
BD Fox, yes.
From there, how do you get connected with The Simpsons from there?
So the big connection there is that's where I met Matt Groening, who's the creator of The Simpsons. And he was, the week that I was hired, they also hired a young art director named Millie Smythe. And Millie was friends with Matt Groening. So she recommended him whenever they needed copywriting for the posters. So if we were working on a campaign for a poster, one of the big things is they would need a tagline. Those are usually the sort of the headline across the top of the poster. It gives you like a little log line about it, and then you'd see the big image, and then you'd see the the title down below, and then the credits. That was like your standard 80s movie poster. So, somebody had to write those copy lines. So they would bring in writers who would sit down and watch the film. We would have like these rough cut versions of the films that nobody had seen yet. And they would watch them, and then they would go off and write, a couple of pages worth of possible lines, and then submit them. And usually they would have, a number of different writers come in. So the chances of your thing getting accepted were, kind of slim. There was a lot of competition, but Matt was a clever guy, and he would write stuff that worked. And so I saw him around the office. I think I met him once, and then I would see him in the hallway, and so I knew him enough to say hi, but that was about it. And I knew that he had a comic strip called Life in Hell. So to some extent, to me, he was a bit of a celebrity, but it was, like I said, pre-Simpsons. So he was still just a struggling cartoonist / writer,
Yeah.
So flash forward a few years, I'd moved on to another illustration studio, which is where I did the Disney posters. I did a lot of other like general advertising unrelated to the movie industry, but that's where the Disney stuff happened. And I got a call one day this is like 1990, early 1990. And it's Millie, my friend Millie. And I hadn't seen her since I left BD Fox. So I hadn't seen her in like maybe 4 years. And she said, "Hey, Bill, how's it going?" And we chit-chatted a little bit. And she said, "You remember Matt Groening?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, of course." And she said, "Well, I don't know if you've seen his new show, but he's got a show on Fox. And he put me in charge of all the merchandise art. So I'm trying to recruit artists to do artwork for merchandise because the show's starting to blow up, and there's all these licensees that have, are kind of on the edge of launching all these products that are going to be out soon, and we don't have enough artists to do the artwork for the packaging. So if that's something you're interested, I don't know if you can do freelance where you're at, but if you can do any work on the side, but if you can, I'd love to talk to you because I know you're doing like the Disney stuff now. And she said, I remembered when we worked together, you were into cartoons and animation and all that. I said, oh yeah, I'd love to. So I came over to her studio and she kind of showed me how to draw the characters. And she gave me my first assignment, which ended up on a T-shirt. I think it ended up on like party napkins and a few other things.
Oh, wow.
But I have the T-shirt, and it's really badly drawn, but it's representative of the show at the time because, like in the first season, everything was pretty funky and not really drawn all that well. So I was like trying to draw in the style of the show, but not really knowing the show yet. So, there's aspects of it that I would change if I had to go back. But I also have to keep reminding myself that, the show, what's considered on model for drawing the characters today is very different from back then. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I did that job, and then they gave me another one, and I did, 3 or 4 more. And the next thing I knew, I was so busy doing Simpsons freelance work that it was affecting my regular job. And so I went into my boss and I said, I've been taking on this freelance work for The Simpsons. And by this time, this is like 2 or 3 months later, and The Simpsons is huge now. It's everybody knows about it. There's just a ton of merchandise, so much so that they actually, in Los Angeles, they opened a Simpsons store for a while. Oh, they had a store that was just in Westwood near UCLA. They had this store that was nothing but Simpsons merchandise. So I went to my boss and I said, I'm doing all the Simpsons work, but I can't keep up with it. Mm-hmm. And I don't want it to affect my job. So what if I brought it into the studio? And, I could continue to work on it. We could bring in some other artists and I could train them. And, you'd be making money. I'd still be making money. And he said, great, would love that. So from that point on, the studio where I worked, which was Willardson Associates, it became like the hub for artwork for The Simpsons. So not only stuff I was doing, but stuff that other artists that we brought in were pumping out.
Wow.
So there was that. One of the things about The Simpsons that is unusual, and I don't think any movie studio has made this deal since Matt Groening made his deal with The Simpsons, but when he made his deal, the deal was Fox would own The Simpsons. However, his lawyer asked if he could retain the publishing rights because she said, he's a cartoonist and he might want to do like a comic strip version of the characters. And when he first pitched The Simpsons, it was for the Tracy Ullman show. It was...
they were like shorts?
They were little short, what they call bumpers.
Okay.
So they would basically, like, they'd have the live sketch comedy. And then when they would go into a commercial, they would show a little Simpsons bumper. And it wasn't just The Simpsons. They had like 2 or 3 other animated things that never caught on, but The Simpsons did. So there would be like a little short cartoon that would take you into the commercial, and then another one that would brought you back out of the commercial, and then they would go back into the live sketch comedy. So Fox never thought that was a big deal. They, it was just throwaway stuff. They didn't think it was anything that would ever catch on. They certainly didn't think it would go, be on the air for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So they said, sure, Matt Groening can have the publishing rights. So what that allowed us to do was, I was doing the merchandise art pretty much all day long. Eventually Fox hired me in-house, and I was doing it directly for them.
Oh, wow.
But like that was like my day job. And then at nights and on weekends, I would work on Matt's publishing projects. So he was doing Simpsons books. He did a magazine called Simpsons Illustrated. And it was in that magazine that we started doing comics. So for the first issue, I was given a script. I was doing, like I did I didn't do the cover for the first issue, but I did like a lot of the interior illustrations for articles and things. Mm-hmm. And the editor called me. Steve Vance was the editor, and he called me one day and he said, I got a script for a comic strip, because Matt wants to have comics in the magazine. Do you want to draw it? And I was like, of course. Are you kidding me? That's all I wanted to do when I was a kid was draw comics. And
yeah.
So finally I get the chance to draw a comic strip. And so he sent me the script. I drew it. Everybody approved it. It was fine. And, but I was super excited. I was like, oh my God, I finally got to draw a comic strip. I want to do this again.
Oh, yeah.
So I called Steve and I said, hey, I know we're starting to work on the second issue. So I was wondering, is there going to be another comic? Because if so, I'd like to draw it. And Steve said, yeah, actually, Matt wants to expand the comics, because in the first issue it was just one page. He wants to have a whole comic section, but we are so behind. Nobody's had time to write anything. So I'll tell you what, if you want to write something, then you can also draw it. And I said, oh, okay, great. And I hung up the phone and I just went, oh my God, what did I just agree to? I've never written anything. I don't even know how to type. How am I going to do this? And so I thought about it for a while, and I'm like, how do you come up with a story? How does that work? And I started thinking about like funny things that happened to me when I was a kid. And I thought, well, maybe I could take like one of those stories from my childhood and then just turn me into Bart, and then turn whatever other adults are in the story or other kids into other Simpsons characters. Maybe that'll work. So
that's a good idea.
That's what I did. And I wrote this, just a 1-page comic, 7-8 panels, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I got my wife to type it for me so I didn't, look like an idiot. And I turned it in, and Steve called me and he goes, hey, this is really good. Matt liked it a lot. He just changed the punchline. So he just kind of rewrote the dialogue and the punchline. But other than that, it's great. So if you want to write another one for the next issue, go ahead.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, I was writing and drawing the comics, and the comic section started expanding. Mm-hmm. So I think eventually we got up to like 10 pages of comics in every issue. And that is what spawned Bongo Comics. Because at the end of the first year of the magazine, we did an annual, and we made it a 3D issue. So it came with 3D glasses. Everything in the magazine, even the advertisements, were in 3D. So when we started thinking about, getting towards the end of the second year, what do we do for the annual? It's got to be another gimmick. It can't just be a thicker issue. It's got to have something, crazy. And somebody suggested, well, we're having so much fun doing the comics. Why don't we just make it a comic book? And so we decided to make it all comics, and not even look like a magazine. Mm-hmm. So we just made it comic book size. We even changed the title from Simpsons Illustrated to Simpsons Comics and Stories, But if you look inside in the indicia, it still says Simpsons Comics and Stories is the annual issue of Simpsons Illustrated. So it's still part of the magazine, but it's the first ever Simpsons comic book. Wow. And so that came out, and it was such a huge hit that it gave Matt the confidence to start Bongo. So he came to me and Steve Vance and Cindy Vance, who was working with Steve. Like she did all the lettering and she did a lot of the design work and the coloring. So it was basically the three of us and Matt. And he said, "How would you guys like to start a comic book company, and we'll just do comic books full time?" And I probably was the first to have my hand up.
Nice, yeah.
Because that was, it was that dream come true. I finally, I had this career as an illustrator, and I thought that's where my life was going. I thought I would be a movie poster artist and do, advertising and album covers, record album covers and stuff like that. And then I found my way back into comic books.
Wow. And is that Bongo Comics, is that still around today?
No, Bongo ended, I think, in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. And by then I was gone. I was at Mad Magazine by the time that happened. But
okay.
Yeah, it folded. I think it was still profitable, just not profitable enough. And Matt had other stuff he wanted to work on. Disenchantment, his new show on Netflix, is probably the main reason.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, well, I guess before I get to Futurama, I wanted to ask you about The Simpsons. I was just watching a YouTube video, a video essay from this YouTube channel, EMP Lemon, huge following on YouTube. And he did an episode it was titled, I think, Why Homer is My Enemy is the best Simpsons episode of all time.
Okay.
It's one that I wasn't familiar with it. I don't know if you are. For you,
is that the Frank Grimes episode?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Super interesting to hear his breakdown of that episode and him kind of tying what the Simpsons represent to the prototypical American family kind of is: husband, wife, 3 kids, oldest son, 2 daughters, little infant, husband works a 9 to 5.
Mom stays home, takes care of the house.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have this guy, Frank Grimes, who comes in, who's trying so hard to make it in life. And yet he sees Homer, who doesn't have the same work ethic.
Yeah.
And yet has
the perfect life.
A perfect life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was kind of tying it to how at some point in our lives, we're Frank. But then we get to a certain point where we're Homer too. And it kind of is this dichotomy between, yourself at different points in life, which I know is with me with, having to feel like I have to grind extra hard, once I graduated college, to now where I wouldn't say it's I don't try, but it's things have kind of settled in their place, and I don't get stressed out about certain things. It's kind of just some things are what they are, and it kind of with what you were saying earlier, with positive energy. It's why would I exert energy towards certain things that I have no control over? Some people call it controlling the controllables. You worry about your own box and don't get stressed out about other things. I thought it was really, really well done video essay.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I could send it to you. It was long too. It was like an hour long video.
Well, I don't know if he touches on this, but I think for most people, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And you never know what the other person is going through. You can look at someone's life and go, that's everything I want. They have all the stuff that I want. But, what Frank Grimes didn't see is Homer's, aggravation with Marge's sisters. And,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things in Homer's life that, Homer would probably change. And he's probably looking at somebody else's life going, maybe it's Flanders.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And that's why he's, always so jealous of Flanders, because Flanders seems to have the perfect life, to the point where everything Flanders does just irritates the hell out of Homer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think everybody's always looking at the person next to them going, okay, that guy's got it figured out. He's got everything I want. I got, I need to be more like that. Or if I can't be more like that, I need to hate that guy because he's got it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you ever hear, I've seen other YouTube videos on people doing video essays on the decline of The Simpsons.
I've never watched any of those.
Do you ever hear people talk?
Oh, yeah. I hear people all the time.
Oh, it's too much. 30 seasons.
Yeah.
They've lost it.
With something that big that so many people, I mean, The Simpsons has been a part of so many people's lives. I mean, it's only natural you're going to have, you're going to have a legion of hardcore fans that might even acknowledge that the show isn't as good as it was, but they don't care because it's still fantastic. It's still great. And you're always going to have naysayers, I mean, with the comic books, we had a lot of people, we didn't get a lot of letters because I think our fans are generally not letter writers. And in the days before there were a lot of blog posts or Twitter where you would get that feedback of people commenting on the latest thing that you put out. So before that time, we wouldn't hear an awful lot about what we did. We wouldn't get a lot of feedback. But when we did, it was almost always positive. It was almost always comments like, oh, that was such a great issue. It could have been an episode. The writers are so good. It's so funny. It looks just like the show. It's, cool. And that was always job number one for me as the editor, because I always felt like the comics were an extension of the show. Like you watch the show, but then, if you've seen every episode, what do you have? Oh, well, there's Simpsons comics. We can continue our enjoyment of these characters beyond just the animated show. So I always tried to make the show or the comics as much like the show as possible. So we would get a lot of comments like that. And then, every so often, especially, once message boards started happening and, more people commenting online, you'd have somebody post something positive about one of the issues. And then, then you read the chain of comments after, and they would range from, I totally agree, best comic book ever, to, oh, I didn't even know there were Simpsons comics, to, yeah, I've read Simpsons comics. They're not funny, So, there, with something that huge, you're always going to have like a whole range of opinions.
I'm sure.
So it doesn't really bother me that people say it's not as good as it was. And quite frankly, there's no way it really could be. It's like Mad Magazine. When I was editing Mad Magazine, Mad had its heyday. And it was really in the 60s and early 70s. And ever since then, it's been in decline. So by the time I inherit it, my job is to try to bring it back to its former glory. And the job that I was given was don't alienate any of the current readers, because most of our readership are subscribers. And we don't want people to cancel their subscriptions because that brings in a lot of money. So even though, magazines are failing, not as many people read physical magazines anymore, Mad, for some reason, still has a ton of subscribers. So don't alienate those people. However, we want you to bring in a new readership. We want you to get women interested. We want you to get ethnicities other than white, white males interested. Basically, our demo was white males 11 to 16 years old, and then white males 45 to 60 years old. So, like kids would read it, and then when they discovered girls, generally they would stop reading it. But then when they became 45-year-old men, they would get interested in it again, either out of nostalgia or because they've got kids now, and they're like, "Hey, I read this when I was a kid, Junior.
Yeah,
take a look at this."
Yeah.
So that's what we had, and it was working okay. But they were like, we need to bring in more people. So, do articles that are going to appeal to a wider demographic. Those people in the hammock, we used to call the hammock basically 17 to 44. So all those people in that hammock between the age of the young buyers and the older buyers, but also women, and also, we want black people and Hispanic people and Asian people and all the people that don't even know what Mad is.
Yeah.
So that was the job. It was to reimagine it, but not change it too much. So I kind of leaned into the early days of Mad, when it was more subversive and it wasn't an institution. I tried to make it more like the young upstart that it was back in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
But it's hard to do that with a show like The Simpsons. The Simpsons was the upstart when it started as a TV show. It was, I'm Bart Simpson, who the hell are you? And underachiever and proud of it.
Yeah, eat my shorts.
Eat my shorts. It was all those things that made people go, "Oh my word, I've never heard such language on TV."
Yeah, yeah.
But that doesn't work anymore. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So you just have to keep squeezing out the toothpaste and hope it's still fresh. And I think for the most part it is. It's just, but if you're going to hold it up to what it was when it was that thing that nobody had ever seen before, everybody's seen it. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think about that with a show that I loved was The Sopranos, and they had that the movie release 2 years ago, a year or two ago now, and I was kind of disappointed in it, but I think because I was comparing it to the TV show, which was, in my opinion, phenomenal, but the movie lacked something. But again, I think because I was comparing it to the TV show, maybe if I didn't do that, like standalone, it's a decent film. The acting's pretty good. I like that they showed Tony's like prequel story and like him growing up, like who he was surrounded with, how exactly he got into the lifestyle he did, like a very cool concept. So yeah,
films like that are tough because I remember when I saw the X-Files film.
Yeah, I remember that show. Yeah.
I think they've done more than one film, maybe, but I remember the first X-Files movie, feature film in theaters. I had seen the X-Files. I'd seen every episode. So I remember thinking, for people who know the show, this is kind of a nice extension of the show. But I sort of tried to put myself in the place of somebody who'd never seen the show. And I thought, for someone who's never seen this show, this movie is a mess. Like it makes no sense. There's all this stuff they refer to that the people who haven't seen the show are not going to be aware of, not going to understand. And I felt a little that way with that Sopranos film. Was it Saints of...
Oh, yeah. Many Saints of Newark.
Of Newark.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like, I enjoyed it as a Sopranos viewer, but I thought, if this is just a standalone film, I don't know what it does beyond just giving you a lot of great backstory. But if it's giving you backstory for something you are unaware of in the first place,
point. Yeah.
Then I don't know if it really works.
That's a really good point. It's a very good point. Yeah, I remember there was a scene in the show they talked about, like Tony's dad pulled out a gun and shot Tony's mom's through her hair. And they did it in Many Saints of Newark as like a callback to it. But it's like, yeah, if you didn't watch the show, you wouldn't really know like the callback,
right?
Like to it.
Yeah, it's kind of fan service.
Yeah.
But if you're not a fan, then where's the service?
Yeah. No, yeah, it's like in stand-up comedy when somebody, like they tell a joke in the first 5 minutes and then towards the end of their act, they make a callback to it that everybody appreciates because we're all there and like, oh, yeah, that's funny. You mentioned that.
Yeah, and it makes for, sometimes like in a stand-up act, the last joke can be awkward. If it's not like a hugely hilarious joke where everybody's, rolling on the floor, gives the comic the opportunity to say, thank you, everyone, good night, and get off the stage, then it can be awkward. It's like, really? That was the last joke? That was the best thing you had? But if it's a callback to an earlier joke that was funny, then it doesn't really have to be that funny. It's satisfying.
Yeah.
It makes you go, oh, he wrapped it up nicely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Gosh. And it's funny because I used to do stand-up comedy.
Oh, yeah?
A little bit, yeah. Just open mics.
Yeah,
like for a few
that's
years.
Hard.
Yes.
I mean, maybe it's not hard for everyone, but I know for me, I've never done stand-up, but I've been an MC many times.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And, as an MC, you're expected to say some funny things.
Yeah.
Opening remarks supposed to be kind of funny and witty. And then whenever I would MC award shows, the Eisner Awards at San Diego Comic-Con every year.
Oh, cool.
But, you're expected to say something kind of funny and witty about the people that you're bringing up on stage to present awards. And like every time before every joke or every, witty remark out of my mouth, or what I think is supposed to be a witty remark out of my mouth, there's that moment of just fear that, as you're saying it, you're like, oh God, I hope they laugh at this.
Yeah.
I hope there's no awkward silence.
That was.
And
me.
if there is, you got to have something planned. You got to have something in your pocket to recover from the awkward silence. It's hard.
Yeah, no, it was very challenging. I bombed a lot, needless to say. With what you're saying, I remember listening to Rodney Dangerfield, and whenever there would be times where he wouldn't get a laugh, and he would say, "Oh, am I moving too fast for you guys over here?" Or he had one joke about a proctologist. He said like something about, "Oh yeah, my proctologist." Nobody laughs, and he's like, "God, that would have been better if you guys knew what a proctologist was."
Yeah, there's a definite art to recovering from a bad joke.
Yeah,
or a joke that doesn't land. It doesn't have to be bad.
I've heard of other comedians too. Patrice O'Neill, if you've ever heard of him, he said that whenever you're bombing, you just accept it, and you pull the rest of the audience in with you. Like, all right, the ship's going down.
You just acknowledge it.
Yeah, we're all going down with the ship at that point. And it almost makes it, I think he was saying it almost makes it worse to try to like try harder not to. It's just, we accept it at this point.
I saw an open mic comic once. It was weird. It was like at this restaurant, and I was with my wife who was in a show, and it was like the cast going out after rehearsal. So everybody goes to this restaurant. We're all at this one table that's right by the stage. And we didn't know there was open mic going on. And it wasn't just open mic comedy. It was like people singing and doing different things. But this guy comes up and starts doing comedy. And everybody in the cast, everybody's chit-chatting. And he's trying to get our attention because, it's a huge distraction.
Yeah.
So really, really difficult situation for him. But he like committed the cardinal sin. He struggled for a while to sort of get our attention. And then when he couldn't, he just kind of stopped his act and looked at us and said, "Do you have any idea how hard it is to get up here and try to make people laugh?"
Wow.
So he started shaming us.
Wow. Yeah.
And we're just like, "Oh my God, dude, what are you doing?"
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Oh, it just made everything so much worse.
Oh, yeah. That's tough. I don't think I ever did that, luckily. But I did, like I said, I bombed quite a bit, which is part of the process.
Yeah.
Like,
But you have to be willing to go there.
Yeah.
It takes guts.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. 100%. 100%. Bill, I just had a couple more questions. If you're okay on time still.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you about Futurama.
Sure.
Because Simpsons is still going on at this point, but Futurama comes around.
Right.
And now with this project, you actually you developed some of these characters that ended up on the show. Is that correct?
I worked with Matt Groening to develop the characters. I can see little parts of the characters sometimes that I go, "Oh, I added that." But I mean, generally they're really Matt. At least 95 to 100% Matt Groening on all the original cast. Basically, what I've always felt my job was to sort of act as a catalyst to get Matt going. Because the way it started was I was working at Bongo, so I'm working for Matt Groening because as the owner of the publishing rights, he is the publisher of Bongo, of everything we did at Bongo. So I'm working for him, and he came in one day and he said, "Hey, I'm working on this new show, and I was wondering if maybe you could come over to my studio like in the evening, a couple of nights a week, and help me visualize the characters." And of course I said yes, and went over to the studio. And I remember the first night he gave me a couple of sentences, just written sentences about Fry and Leela. And it was as simple as Leela is an alien. At the time, she was an alien, not a mutant. So it was like Leela is an alien who knows martial arts and lives in the future. And possible love interest for Fry. And, so like as simple as that. And then Fry was like delivery boy, cryogenically frozen, who wakes up in, 1,000 years in the future. And he's still a delivery boy, but for a galactic version of FedEx. It's like, okay. So I just started drawing, like what I thought those characters might look like. Mm-hmm. Oh, and he mentioned Leela was a Cyclops. So I know all the early drawings, she just had one eye. But, different hairstyles, different, body types, body shapes. I think, early on, Fry looked maybe a little more like a teenage Bart Simpson.
Okay.
Bender was also, probably within the first week I was working on Bender. And originally Bender was the Planet Express ship cook. So like his only function was he was in the galley of the ship. And whenever they were on the ship making deliveries, he would serve up the meals.
Okay.
And they were always inedible to humans. They were always like motor oil based, and they would have gears and, stuff that only a robot could eat.
Yeah.
So that was going to be like the running gag. And I remember originally Matt said, he's kind of like Homer, maybe he's a little stupid, et cetera, et cetera. So I just started doing a lot of drawings and showing them to Matt. And then he would look at my stuff and go, that's not really what I was thinking, but I kind of like this part,
Mm-hmm.
And then he would do a drawing. He would do a drawing based on my drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would take that and I would do like a refined version of that. And we would do that, multiple times with the same character. So ultimately, they really look, they're really almost 100% Matt's designs. But I always take pride in the fact that Matt really initially didn't know what they should look like. So he needed somebody to sort of show him what he didn't want
Spark.
to make him realize what he did want. Mostly.
Yeah.
And then later, in the development process, I started actually doing designs for the show, things that actually made it on the screen.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, I mean, I look at the main cast and I see little things that I go, yeah, that was my contribution, but not a whole lot.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So anyway, I was, really just helping him develop the show in order to pitch it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he pitched it to Fox and they bought it, I was really not involved for a little while because I was, just went back to my bongo work full time. But when he sold the show, he said, I want, Fox said, we're going to put you up in some offices in one of our buildings. And he said, okay, but I would like my publishing company to be in the same space so that I can just be there. And if I have a meeting, I don't have to drive across town. Mm-hmm. We can all be in the one place together. So they put us down the hall from the Futurama production offices. So I was there, and the producers of the show knew what my involvement had been with the development. So they started working on the pilot episode, and almost on a daily basis, somebody would come down to my office and say, hey, could you give us like a bunch of ray guns? Can you draw just like a page full of ray guns or spaceships? Or, they just kept asking me to visualize stuff for them.
Yeah.
And then it increased. It got to be more and more and more. And finally it was like a second job. Like I was doing so many designs for the pilot that I went down to one of the producers and I said, hey, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm really having fun with this, but it's really become like a second job. And I don't want this to, affect Bongo. I think I can handle both, but I kind of feel like I should get paid for what I'm doing because I'm not. And I also feel like I should get a screen credit. I should, if I'm going to be working on the show, I should actually be working on the show.
Okay.
And they agreed. They said, yeah, you're right. Sorry, we, everything's crazy. We just weren't really thinking about it. But yes, you're absolutely right. So what do you think your credit should be? And I was like, I'm thinking, I didn't know you got to choose your credit. I thought it was something they just like gave you.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know. I said, mostly what I do is character design. So I guess character designer. And the producer said, oh, no. You can't have that. Because, Rough Draft is the animation studio that's doing all the animation. I'm working directly for Matt. Even though I'm doing art on the show, I'm not working for the animation studio.
Okay.
So 2 separate things. And they said, it would be stepping on some toes if we gave you that credit. And I said, well, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions? They said, well, how about art director? And I said, well, that sounds better than character designer. Okay.
Yeah,
really?
Legit. Yeah.
I said, yeah. We don't have an art director, so you can be the art director.
Nice.
It's like, okay. So for most of the run of the show, the initial run, I was really a designer. I was, designing characters, vehicles, props, celebrity heads in jars, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But the person who was really the art director was Millie Smythe, the person I mentioned earlier, who was the art director I had worked with, who introduced me to Matt and got me involved in Simpsons merchandise art. So Matt had brought her on as a co-producer. And really, the job she was doing was art director. She was working with the animators. They would send these model designs over to her every day. Mm-hmm. She would make notes. She would send them on to Matt and David X. Cohen to get their input. And then, so she was like a liaison between the animators and Matt and David. But she was, giving them notes like, this character doesn't really look the way the script describes him. I think the hair should be bushier, mm-hmm. or I think this character should be fatter, or whatever. She was making those calls. Well, Millie ended up getting pregnant and went on maternity leave. And when that happened, they gave me her workload. So for a period of a number of episodes, I was actually doing the job of art director.
Wow. That's cool. Wow. Yeah, that art director sounds like, I just think like director, like you're the head, like top.
Yeah, a lot of people confuse animation director and animation art director. And I've been referred to as Simpson or Futurama director Bill Morrison. It's a little awkward. And usually if that happens and it's awkward to correct somebody about it, mm-hmm. I usually don't. Mm-hmm. But if it's something where I'm like, yeah, I know one of the Futurama directors is going to hear this or see this, and they're going to be like, what the hell, Morrison?
Yeah. This guy.
Yeah. So I usually correct it and say, well, no, I'm not. I wasn't a director. The director of an episode, they would have several different directors, and they mm-hmm. would rotate. And, I don't know how many, a director might direct every 4th or 5th episode, something like that. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But they're the ones that are basically, sometimes the directors actually do the storyboards, or they're overseeing the storyboards. They're overseeing the character designs, the background designs. They get everything to the point where, at least for our show, they would get it to the point where they felt like they could send it over to the producers. I would look at it, or most often Millie would look at it as art director. And then it would go up the chain to Matt and David. They would make their comments, and then everything would get kind of polished.
Okay.
But the director is the one who, they work on the timing of the animation. Sometimes they work with the voice actors even. Okay. They're at the recording sessions. So that's a big job. That's a huge job. And the director, like I said, is not working on every episode. Whereas the art director, still a big job, but you're doing like a smaller workload, but across every episode.
Okay.
So we, as the art director, I had a constant stream of designs coming. So after all the designs were set for one episode, I would start getting designs for the next one.
Very cool. Okay. Nice. Bill, just one last question, and just to wrap things up. What are you currently working on? What do you
Well,
spend your time doing
since my wife and I moved back to Michigan from California, I've been a freelance artist. So I'm working on really kind of a cornucopia of
now? Yeah.
different things.
I like that word.
Yeah, I'm still working as an illustrator. I'm still working as a comic artist and writer. I'm still doing some animation design work occasionally, and I'm teaching animation, character, and environment design at CCS, my alma mater.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I do that a couple days a week.
Very cool.
But some of the recent things I've worked on, if anybody knows Svengoolie, which is a TV show that's on MeTV on Saturday nights. Svengoolie is a horror show host, so he shows horror movies, but he does comedy bits like in between the movies. I just did what was initially a T-shirt design, but I did it as a 1940s movie poster, so it looks like a poster kind of for one of the films that he shows all the time, like the Universal monster horror films.
Okay.
But it's featuring him, instead of Frankenstein or the Wolfman. But I just found out they're turning that into a print. So it's now released as a mini print along with these 4 other designs by other artists. But they're actually going to make it into a large, I think probably like a 14 by 20 size, suitable for framing, hang on your wall kind of thing. So I'm kind of back to my movie poster roots with that one.
Yeah.
I've got a deal with a company in France who initially I pitched them some ideas for animated either TV shows or films. And there were 2 of the pitches that they liked quite a bit. So our original idea was to develop those, develop pitches, more elaborate pitches for those 2 ideas as probably a couple of animated TV series. And so the more elaborate pitch would involve a Bible, color character designs, basically what I was doing with Matt Groening on Futurama, like a real formal pitch to a network or a studio. But it turns out that this company has launched a publishing arm, so they're now starting to do comics as well. So they said, look, instead of putting a lot of time into developing this as a show or a movie, which may get bought but maybe not, why don't we do it as a comic? And then all the development is already done. It's done in the process of making the comic. Mm-hmm. And then we can pitch that. After the comic's out, we can then pitch it as a show.
Okay. So
I'm working on that right now. I do a lot of commissions. A lot of Simpsons fans have now gotten to the age where they're collecting artwork. And so I get requests to do sketches or sometimes more elaborate finished recreations of old comic book covers, things like that.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I do a lot of that. That's kind of fill-in work between jobs.
Yeah.
I have a commission list going, so if I'm not working on a regular job, I'll go to my commission list and start.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Working through that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So still staying busy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably more so than well, I won't say more than ever, but once I became an editor, I found that I was still busy, but not doing artwork or writing as much.
Mm-hmm.
I was mostly overseeing other people doing those jobs. So this is really fun and exciting and refreshing for me because now I'm spending really every day creating, which I hadn't been able to do for years. I would do it occasionally when I was editing. Like I would do a cover, or if I had, a lot of time, I might write a short story. But this is the first time in many years where, that's basically my job other than my teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Is, my job is just being creative every day, either writing or drawing or painting.
Wow. That sounds like the life. Bill, for those who want to get in touch with you, see you work, what's the best way that they can do that?
Either Instagram or Facebook.
Nice.
I'm not on Twitter any longer, but those two platforms. Nice. And you can find me, my studio name is Atomic Battery Studios. So you can find me on Facebook at Bill Morrison / Atomic Battery Studios. Instagram, I am at Atomic Battery.
Awesome. And I will include links to those in the description of the episode too, for people to check it out.
Terrific.
Yeah, we did. Wow, we're at hour 46.
Wow. Holy crap. This is going to be 2 episodes.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here and talk to me. And you've had a very, very interesting life. It's awesome to hear all this stuff that you.
It has been a wonderful life. See what I did there with the callback?
Perfect. See, I set you up for that. I that was my plan all along, to serve it up. No, seriously though, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Bill.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for everyone out there, thank you so much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.